The blood dripped from his fingers onto her welcome mat, each drop blooming like a dark flower against the worn fibers, and Elena knew, with the absolute certainty that comes from carrying a monster's child, that her week of borrowed peace had just ended. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. She stood frozen in the doorway of the small cottage shed rented under a false name, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat belly. Dominic Ashford, the vampire lord who had both damned and transformed her life, swayed on her threshold, his usually immaculate black coat torn and soaked with blood that was certainly not his own. His silver eyes, which had once gazed at her with something dangerously close to tenderness, now burned with feral desperation. "They know," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraped across silk. "They know about the child, Elena. We have perhaps an hour before they find this place." 7 days. She'd had 7 days of silence, 7 days of convincing herself that disappearing into this forgotten corner of the Scottish Highlands would be enough. 7 days of morning sickness and terror and the growing realization that the life inside her was something the world had never seen. The child of a human woman and a vampire lord, a combination that should have been impossible. Elena had been a research librarian at Edinburgh University, specializing in medieval texts. When Dominic had walked into the archives 6 months ago, requesting access to manuscripts that technically didn't exist in any public catalog, she should have known then, should have recognized the predatory grace, the way shadows seemed to cling to him like loyal subjects, the fact that he never appeared before dusk. But she'd been lonely, brilliant, and invisible. The kind of woman people's eyes slid past without seeing. And he had seen her, really seen her. "I'm not going with you," she said, though her voice trembled. Her hand tightened on the door. That was the point of leaving. "The point of leaving," Dominic said, pushing past her with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, was supposed to be protection, anonymity, neither of which you have now. He turned to face her, and despite the blood and the obvious wounds beneath his shredded clothing, he remained devastatingly beautiful. Pale skin like marble, features carved with cruel precision, dark hair falling across his forehead. "The Covenant has deployed hunters. Not the usual sort. These are the old kind. The kind who remember when my family ruled the night without question." Elena closed the door, her mind racing. The Covenant. Dominic had mentioned them once, during one of their long nights together, when she'd still believed their relationship was an unconventional romance rather than a catastrophic mistake. An ancient organization dedicated to maintaining the balance between the supernatural world and the human one. They had laws, treaties, and apparently the conception of a vampire-human hybrid violated every single one of them. "How did they find out?" she asked. "Does it matter?" Dominic moved through her small living space like a caged wolf, checking the windows with movements too fast for human eyes to track comfortably. "Though, if I had to guess, someone in my household betrayed us. I've had disagreements with certain members of the court. They would see this pregnancy as an abomination, a threat to vampire purity." "It is an abomination," Elena said quietly. "You told me yourself we couldn't conceive, that it was impossible." He stopped, his back to her. "I was wrong. You're 300 years old. How do you just get something like that wrong?" Because in 300 years I have never—" He cut himself off, his shoulders rigid. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "It doesn't matter what I felt. What matters is survival, yours and the child's." Elena sank into the threadbare armchair she'd bought at a charity shop in the village. She'd chosen this cottage specifically because it was remote. No neighbors for miles, one road in and out, surrounded by moors that stretched empty to the horizon. She'd believed that would be enough. "What do they want?" she asked. "The hunters?" "To kill the child before it's born, to kill you for carrying it, and to deliver me to the Covenant for judgment." He finally turned to look at her, and she saw something flicker across his face. Fear, perhaps, or the memory of it. "There are things they can do to vampires, Elena. Old methods. We can die, but it takes considerable effort. The Covenant knows every method intimately." "So you came here to save yourself?" "I came here because you're carrying my child." His voice turned sharp, dangerous. "And because, despite your opinion of me, which I can only assume has deteriorated significantly in the past week, I do not abandon what is mine. I'm not yours. The child is." He crossed the room in a blur of movement, crouching before her chair so quickly she flinched. His hands gripped the armrests on either side of her, caging her in. Up close, she could see the wounds now. Deep gashes across his chest that were healing even as she watched, the flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. "And that makes you mine to protect, whether you like it or not." Elena met his gaze, refusing to look away despite the supernatural weight of it. "You could have told me what you were. Before. Would you have believed me? I deserved the choice." Something complicated crossed his face. Regret, perhaps, though she hadn't known vampires were capable of it. "You're right, you did. But I was—" It had been a very long time since I wanted something I couldn't simply take. I told myself waiting was prudent, that revealing my nature too soon would drive you away. His lips twisted in a bitter smile. Cowardice wearing the mask of strategy. Before Elena could respond, Dominic's head snapped toward the window. His entire body went rigid, predatory instinct taking over. "They're here." "That wasn't an hour." "I said perhaps an hour." He rose in one fluid movement, moving to the window. "I may have been optimistic." Elena stood on shaking legs. "How many?" "6. No, 7. He glanced back at her. "Can you run?" "I'm barely 6 weeks pregnant, not an invalid." "Good." He moved to the back door, opening it to reveal the dark moors beyond. "There's a stone circle about 2 miles northeast. Old magic saturates that ground. It will make tracking us more difficult. Can you make it that far?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not unless you'd prefer to meet the hunters." As if summoning them, something heavy hit the front door. Wood splintered. Dominic's hand shot out, grabbing Elena's wrist. "Now." They ran. The Highland night swallowed them whole. Elena had never been athletic. Her idea of exercise was climbing the library stairs to the restricted section. But terror gave her legs a strength she didn't know she possessed. Dominic pulled her along, his grip on her wrist unbreakable but somehow not painful, adjusting his supernatural speed to something she could almost match. Behind them, shouts erupted. A woman's voice, cold and commanding, cut through the darkness. "Don't let them reach the circle." "Faster," Dominic growled. The moors were treacherous, all hidden holes and unexpected slopes. Elena stumbled repeatedly, but each time Dominic's grip kept her from falling completely. The wind whipped her hair around her face, carrying the scent of heather and something else, something metallic and wrong. "What are they?" she gasped. "Hunters." humans trained by the Covenant. Enhanced with just enough supernatural blood, stronger. Not enough to make them vulnerable to our weaknesses, but enough to make them very, very dangerous. A whistling sound cut the air. Dominic yanked Elena sharply to the left, and something, an arrow, buried itself in the ground where she'd been running. In the moonlight, she saw the shaft was wrapped in chains that glowed with a sickly green light. Iron and ash, Dominic spat. They came prepared. Another arrow. This one Dominic caught out of the air, snapping it in half with one hand. The circle. How much farther? Elena tried to orient herself, but everything looked the same in the darkness. Endless stretches of rough grass and heather, the occasional outcropping of rock. There! They pushed harder. Elena's lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but the stones were getting closer. 50 yards, 40, 30. A figure materialized directly in front of them, stepping from behind a boulder with inhuman grace. The woman from before, the voice that had given commands. She was perhaps 40, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that reflected the moonlight like a cat's. She wore combat gear that seemed to absorb the darkness, and in her hands she held twin blades that dripped with something vicious and wrong. "Lord Ashford," she said pleasantly, "how far you've fallen." Dominic pushed Elena behind him. "Commander Vale, still doing the Covenant's dirty work, I see." "Someone has to maintain order." Her enhanced eyes flicked to Elena. "Is this the human? She's not what I expected. Rather plain." "Careful," Dominic said softly, dangerously. "I can see that. You're wounded, tired, and protecting cargo that slows you down." Vale's smile was cold. "This doesn't have to be difficult, Dominic. Surrender the human." Let us handle the abomination she carries quietly. The Covenant might show leniency given your previous service to our cause. Previous service? Elena couldn't help asking. "Oh, he didn't tell you?" Vale's smile widened. "Lord Ashford used to be one of us. Well, an affiliate. He helped the Covenant hunt down rogue vampires for nearly a century. Quite the decorated career before he decided rules no longer applied to him." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She looked at Dominic's rigid back, unable to see his face. Another thing he hadn't told her. "That was a long time ago," Dominic said. "Different circumstances." "Was it?" Vale cocked her head. "Or did you simply find something you wanted more than approval? Something you couldn't have within the boundaries of civilization?" The other hunters emerged from the darkness, forming a loose circle around them. Elena counted quickly, 6 total, including Vale. All armed with those strange glowing weapons. All moving with the same enhanced grace. "Last chance, Dominic," Vale said. "The human and the thing inside her, or we take all 3 of you back to the Covenant in pieces." Elena felt Dominic's body coil, preparing for violence. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Elena, when I move, you run for the stones. Don't look back, don't stop. Get inside the circle and do not leave it, no matter what you hear. Understand? You can't fight all 6 of them. I've fought worse odds. Promise me." Elena's hand found his back, pressing against the torn fabric of his coat. Beneath it, she felt the unnatural coldness of his skin, the inhuman stillness that marked him as something other. 7 days ago, she'd fled from this, from him, from what they'd created together. But that was before hunters had tried to kill her child. "Promise me," Dominic repeated. "I promise." "Good." And then he moved. What happened next was almost impossible for Elena's human eyes to follow. Dominic became a blur of motion, crossing the distance to Vale in less than a heartbeat. The commander barely got her blades up in time to deflect his first strike, and then they were engaged in a dance of violence so fast and brutal it seemed choreographed. Elena ran. The other hunters converged, but Dominic somehow kept them occupied, his movements impossibly fluid as he fought 5 opponents at once. Blood flew, his and theirs. One hunter went down screaming, clutching at his throat. Another's arm bent at an unnatural angle. Elena's boots hit stone. She stumbled into the center of the standing stones, her hands scraping against rough granite as she caught herself. The moment she crossed the threshold of the circle, she felt something change. The air grew thick, weighted with a presence that was neither hostile nor friendly, simply ancient. She turned back to watch Dominic fight. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, every bit the apex predator she'd tried to forget. But there were too many hunters, and they were too skilled. Vale's blades found their mark, slicing deep across Dominic's back. He staggered, black blood staining his torn coat. "Dominic!" Elena's shout echoed across the moors. He looked back at her, silver eyes finding hers across the distance. In them, she saw relief. She'd made it to safety. But she also saw resignation. He wasn't going to make it to the circle himself. Vale pressed her advantage, driving him back. The other hunters closed in, their glowing weapons raised. One produced a chain that writhed like a living thing, wrapping around Dominic's arm. He snarled, tearing it free, but it left smoking burns on his pale skin. Elena's mind raced. The circle was protection, Dominic had said as much. Old magic saturated this ground. But protection from what? Tracking, had said, making it difficult to find them. Magic recognizes magic. Her hand went to her belly, to the impossible life growing there. Half vampire. Half human. A thing that shouldn't exist, that broke every natural law. A child conceived by a creature of death and a mortal woman. A bridge between worlds. Elena didn't know if what she was about to do would work. She knew virtually nothing about magic, despite her years studying ancient texts. But those texts had taught her one thing. Intent mattered. Belief mattered. And she believed absolutely in one thing. She would not let her child's father die in front of her. She pressed both hands flat against the nearest standing stone and thought, "Help him." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone beneath her palms grew warm. The warmth spread, flowing through the stone to the others, until all 12 stones in the circle were glowing with a soft silver light. The ancient presence she felt intensified, and Elena gasped as power, raw and old and vast, flooded through her. It recognized the life in her womb, recognized its impossible nature, and it answered. Light exploded outward from the circle, racing across the moor like a breaking wave. It hit the hunters like a physical force, sending them staggering backward. Vale raised her arms to shield her eyes, her blades falling from nerveless fingers. "What is this?" she shouted. Dominic didn't waste time questioning. He broke free from the remaining hunters and ran, his supernatural speed carrying him to the stone circle in seconds. The moment he crossed the threshold, the light died as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only darkness and the sound of harsh breathing. Elena's legs gave out. She would have fallen, but Dominic caught her, lowering them both to the ground inside the circle of stones. His arms wrapped around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, and she felt him shaking, with exhaustion or relief or something else entirely. "What did you do?" he asked against her hair. "I don't know." Elena was shaking too. asked for help. Outside the circle, the hunters were regrouping. Vale had retrieved her blades and was staring at them with murder in her enhanced eyes. But she didn't approach. None of them did. They stood just beyond the stones, like animals facing an invisible barrier. They can't enter, Elena realized. No, Dominic's voice was grim. But they can wait. And at sunrise, I'll be significantly weakened. They know that. Elena pulled back enough to look at him. In the moonlight, his wounds were visible, deep cuts that were healing slowly, too slowly. The glowing weapons had done more damage than normal blades. You're hurt. I'll heal, given time. Which we don't have. No. He touched her face gently, his cold fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. I'm sorry, Elena, for all of this. For not being honest from the beginning, for not protecting you better. You came back, she said quietly. You could have run, let them have me, saved yourself. No, he said simply. I couldn't. Vale's voice cut across the darkness. This changes nothing, Ashford. You're trapped. When dawn comes, we'll drag you out of there and finish this. And the human will watch you burn before we deal with her. Dominic said nothing, but Elena felt his arms tighten around her. They sat in silence for a long moment, surrounded by ancient stones and encircled by enemies. The night wind whispered across the moors, carrying scents of heather and distant rain. Inside the circle, Elena felt oddly safe despite everything. As if the old magic that had answered her call still lingered, watchful and waiting. Tell me about the covenant, she said finally. The truth this time. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the stones where the hunters waited. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. They were formed in the 13th century, during the height of what humans called the Inquisition. But their true purpose wasn't hunting witches. It was establishing a treaty between the supernatural world and the mortal one. Vampires, shifters, witches, the Fae, all the things that go bump in the night, we were becoming too visible, too bold. Humans were developing weapons that could actually hurt us. War seemed inevitable. So they created rules, treaties, carefully negotiated boundaries. We would stay in the shadows, and they would ensure certain amenities. Access to blood without drawing attention, protection from vampire hunters and witch burnings, zones where our kind could exist without interference. His hand moved unconsciously to her belly. And strict laws about mixing the species. No hybrid children, no crossing of bloodlines. The balance, they called it. Preserve the balance or face extinction on both sides. Elena absorbed this. And you helped enforce these rules? For nearly 100 years, yes. I believed in it, or convinced myself I did. I'd seen what happened when vampires grew reckless. Whole villages slaughtered, children drained in their beds. Vampire lords treating humans like cattle. The Covenant stopped that. They brought order to chaos. What changed? He looked down at her, and in his silver eyes she saw something raw and unguarded. I met a brilliant, impossible woman in an archive full of forbidden books. A woman who looked at medieval manuscripts about supernatural creatures with scientific curiosity rather than fear or disgust. Who talked to me about the cultural implications of vampire mythology for 3 hours straight without realizing she was talking to one. His lips curved in a bittersweet smile. Who saw me as a man before she knew I was a monster. You're not a monster, Elena said automatically, then stopped. Or maybe you are, but not only that. Not the ringing endorsement I'd hoped for, but I'll take it. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Then reality crashed back. What happens now? We can't stay in this circle forever. No, but we might not have to. Dominic shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. There's someone who might help us, a witch named Rowena who lives in the Cairngorms. She's old, older than me by several centuries, and she has no love for the Covenant. If we can reach her, she might be able to hide you properly, ward you against tracking magic. And you? I'll deal with the Covenant, answer for my crimes, negotiate, fight if I must, but you and the child will be safe. Elena felt her temper flare. So your plan is to martyr yourself while I hide in a witch's cottage? That's your solution? My solution is to ensure you survive. Nothing else matters. I don't accept that. You don't have a choice. The hell I don't. Elena pushed away from him, anger giving her strength. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about my life, Dominic. Not anymore. If we're going to survive this, and we are going to survive, then we do it together or not at all. He stared at her, something like wonder crossing his face. You're serious? Completely. Elena, you're a human librarian who's 6 weeks pregnant. What exactly do you think you can do against trained Covenant hunters and the political machinery of the supernatural world? She leaned forward, holding his gaze. Something you apparently keep forgetting. I've spent 10 years researching the medieval supernatural. Every text, every manuscript, every piece of forbidden knowledge that crossed into university archives. Do you know what I found in those documents? Treaties, loopholes, precedents. The Covenant didn't just spring fully formed from nothing. It has laws, rules, and rules can be challenged if you know how. Dominic went very still. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe there's a reason they're so desperate to kill this child before it's born. Maybe it's not just about purity or balance. Her hand pressed against her belly. Maybe it's because a hybrid child would have rights they don't want acknowledged, claims they don't want made. That's actually possible. Dominic's mind was clearly racing. Vampire law is based on blood right. The oldest families have the most power because their bloodlines are the purest. But there's never been a case of mixed blood because it was always believed to be impossible. Until now. Until now, he agreed slowly. If our child survives, if it grows strong, it could theoretically claim blood right from my family line. The Ashford line is one of the oldest in the British Isles. And with human blood, it might also be able to walk in daylight, move through both worlds, which would make it more powerful than either parent. They looked at each other as the implications settled between them. Outside the circle, Elena could hear the hunters moving, their enhanced hearing probably catching every word. Let them hear. Let them report back to the Covenant that their targets weren't just running. They were thinking. They'll never allow it, Dominic said. The moment they realize we understand the implications, they'll throw everything they have at us. Then we'd better move fast. Elena struggled to her feet, using the standing stone for support. How long until dawn? Dominic glanced at the sky, his vampire senses reading signs Elena couldn't see. 3 hours, maybe less. Enough time to reach this witch? If we run, and if Vale doesn't have more hunters in reserve. He stood beside her, his wounds still visible but healing. You're sure about this? Once we commit to this path, there's no going back to your quiet life in Edinburgh. Elena thought about her small flat, her predictable routines, her invisible existence in the university library. 7 days ago, that life had seemed precious. Now it seems impossibly distant, like something from a dream. I was never really alive in that life, she said quietly. I was just existing, waiting. For what? I didn't know. She looked up at him. Maybe I was waiting for you. For this. For a reason to fight for something. Dominic's expression shifted, becoming almost vulnerable. Elena. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't say something you'll regret later. We have 3 hours to cross hostile territory, reach a witch who may or may not help us, and figure out how to challenge an organization that's existed for 800 years. Romance can wait. You're extraordinary, he said quietly. I need you to know that. Despite everything, Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest. Save it for when we're not being hunted. Now, how do we get out of this circle without Vale's hunters killing us immediately? They spent the next several minutes planning. The standing stones provided protection, but they were also a cage. Eventually, they'd have to leave, and when they did, the hunters would be waiting. What about the magic? Elena asked. The thing that responded when I asked for help. Can we use it again? I don't know. Dominic studied the stones thoughtfully. This is old power, pre-Roman, probably Pictish or even earlier. It responded to you, which suggests it recognized something in your child. But old magic is unpredictable. It doesn't follow rules the way newer forms do. So it might help us, or it might not. Exactly. Elena pressed her hand against the stone again, feeling for that warmth she'd sensed before. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she felt it. A pulse, like a heartbeat deep in the earth. Not hostile, but not exactly friendly either. More like a massive animal deciding whether these small creatures in its territory were prey or something else. She thought about her child, about the impossibility of its existence, about 2 worlds meeting in one tiny growing life. We need passage, she whispered to the stone. Safe passage to the mountains. Please. The pulse grew stronger. And then, between one breath and the next, fog began to rise from the moor. Not the natural fog of the highlands, but something thicker, more purposeful. It rolled across the ground like a living thing, swallowing the landscape in moments. Elena heard Vale shout, "Visibility down! Form defensive positions!" The hunters scrambled, but the fog was faster. Within seconds, it had grown so thick that Elena could barely see Dominic standing right next to her, and he was only a few feet away. "Did you do that?" he asked. "I think the stones did. Come on, before it clears." They left the circle, moving into the fog. Elena expected arrows or attacks, but nothing came. The fog seemed to confuse the hunters' enhanced senses. She heard them calling to each other, their voices muffled and disoriented. Dominic took her hand, guiding her through the white blindness with supernatural certainty. They moved quickly but carefully, trying not to make sound. The moor was treacherous in the dark, even more so in the fog. Behind them, Vale's voice cut through the white. "Track them! They can't have gone far!" But the fog held. It clung to them like a protective shroud, following as they moved. Elena realized with a start that it wasn't just obscuring them, it was actively helping them, showing Dominic where to place his feet, where the ground was solid, where the path was clear. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, the ground began to rise, becoming rockier. Trees appeared through the fog, ancient pines that marked the edge of the Cairngorm forest. Only when they were deep among the trees did the fog begin to thin. It retreated slowly, reluctantly, like it wanted to ensure they were truly safe before abandoning them. Elena stopped, bending over with her hands on her knees, gasping for breath. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her lungs burned. Beside her, Dominic wasn't even breathing hard, though his wounds were still visible through his torn coat. "How far to the witch?" she managed to ask between breaths. 5 miles, maybe 6. The terrain gets rougher from here." He studied her with concern. "Can you make it?" "I'll have to, won't I?" She straightened, pushing her hair out of her face. "Lead on." They moved through the forest as quickly as Elena could manage. The trees here were old, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the moonlight. Dominic moved with perfect confidence, his vampire vision seeing clearly in the darkness, while Elena stumbled and cursed. "Tell me about this witch," Elena said, partly to distract herself from her burning legs. "Why would she help us? Rowena and the Covenant have history, bad history. About 200 years ago, they tried to bind her with an enforced treaty, limit her magic, control where she could practice. She refused. They sent hunters to force her compliance." Dominic's voice was grim. It didn't go well for the hunters, or for the Covenant's reputation. Eventually, they reached an understanding. She stays out of their way, they leave her alone. So she's powerful. Extraordinarily so. And completely unpredictable. She might help us because she dislikes the Covenant, or she might turn us over to them because she finds it amusing. Or she might ignore us entirely and go back to whatever arcane research she's conducting. He glanced back at her. "I won't lie to you. This is a gamble." "Everything about this situation is a gamble." Elena grabbed a tree trunk for support as they climbed a particularly steep slope. "At least with her, we have a chance. Without her, we're just running until we can't run anymore." True enough. They climbed for another hour. The terrain grew increasingly difficult. Rocky outcroppings, steep inclines, and eventually the sound of running water that marked one of the mountain streams. Elena's muscles screamed in protest, her body not used to this kind of exertion. The only thing keeping her moving was sheer stubborn determination and the knowledge that stopping meant dying. Finally, Dominic held up a hand. "We're close. Her home is just beyond that ridge." Elena looked where he pointed and saw nothing but darkness and trees. "I'll take your word for it." "Elena." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Before we approach, you need to understand something about Rowena. She's not like other witches, not like the Hollywood version or even the historical version you've studied. She's old enough to remember when magic was as common as breathing, when the veil between worlds was thin as gossip. That kind of age changes you, makes you other. Other how? Other as in she might not see you as fully human anymore. As in she definitely won't see me as a person, more like an interesting specimen. As in she could decide to help us or experiment on us, or simply watch us fail for her own amusement." He touched her face gently. "If at any point you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, we leave, immediately. Promise me." "I promise." Elena covered his hand with hers. "Thank you for everything, for coming back, for protecting me. For getting you into this mess in the first place, you mean. For making me feel alive for the first time in my life." She smiled despite everything, even if it's terrifying. Dominic looked like he wanted to say something, but before he could, a voice drifted through the trees. Old, amused, and definitely female. How sweet. The vampire and his pet human declaring their affections on my doorstep. Do come in before the moment gets any more saccharine. Elena jumped, her heart hammering. She hadn't heard anyone approach. Dominic went very still, his body coiled with tension. "Rowena," he said carefully. "Dominic." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing among the trees. "And the infamous Elena Chen." The human clever enough to catch a vampire's heart, stupid enough to let him put a child in her womb, and now brave enough or desperate enough to come begging at a witch's door. You're even more interesting than the rumors suggested. A light bloomed in the darkness ahead, not torchlight or electric light, but something that glowed with its own cold, blue radiance. As Elena's eyes adjusted, she made out a structure among the trees. Not quite a cottage, not quite a cave, something in between, as if the rocks and trees had grown together to form walls and a roof, all covered in moss that glowed faintly silver in the darkness. And standing in the doorway, backlit by that eerie light, was Rowena. She was not at all what Elena expected. Her mental image had been something like a fairy tale crone, bent back, hooked nose, maybe a few warts for good measure. Instead, Rowena appeared to be in her early 30s, tall and willowy, with waist-length black hair threaded with silver, and eyes that were entirely too bright, entirely too knowing. She wore a simple dress that might have been green or gray. It seemed to shift in the uncertain light, and her feet were bare despite the cold. "Well," she said, smiling, "are you going to stand there gaping, or are you going to come inside and tell me why I should risk the Covenant's wrath by sheltering you?" Dominic and Elena exchanged a glance. Then, together, they walked toward the witch's strange home. The interior was larger than should have been possible given the exterior dimensions, a phenomenon that Elena's rational mind immediately tried to explain and failed. The single room was lined with shelves holding jars of things that glowed, moved, or somehow did both. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling, and a fire burned in a hearth that seemed to be carved from a single massive stone. Books were stacked everywhere, some looking ancient beyond measure, others seeming too modern to belong in this place. Rowena closed the door behind them with a gesture, not touching it. Elena heard multiple locks click into place, though she saw no locks on the door itself. "Sit," Rowena commanded, waving toward cushions arranged around the fire. "You look exhausted, Elena. And you, Dominic, look like you got into a fight with a pack of wolves and lost." "Covenant hunters," Dominic said, lowering himself onto a cushion with the careful movements of someone trying not to aggravate wounds. 7 of them, led by Commander Vale. Rowena's eyebrows rose. Vale herself? My, you have made the Covenant nervous. She moved to one of her shelves, selecting several jars. They only deploy Vale when they want things handled with absolute finality. "We noticed," Elena said dryly. The witch laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "I like you already. Most humans who stumble into my home are too terrified to manage sarcasm." She began mixing ingredients from her jars, herbs and powders and things Elena couldn't identify, into a mortar. "Let's address the immediate problem first. Dominic, those wounds were made with consecrated iron, weren't they? And ash from a rowan tree burned during a blood moon," he confirmed. "Nasty stuff. It'll keep you weak for days if we don't treat it properly." Rowena ground her mixture with practiced efficiency. "Elena, dear, make yourself useful. There's a kettle on the fire. Pour 3 cups of the water, no more, no less, into that blue bowl on the table." Elena did as instructed, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. The water steamed as it hit the bowl, and she caught the scent of something herbal and clean. Rowena added her powder to the water, which immediately began to glow with a soft golden light. "Dominic, shirt off. Let's see the damage." He hesitated only a moment before stripping off what remained of his coat and shirt. In the firelight, Elena could see the full extent of his wounds. Deep gashes across his chest and back, burn marks where the chains had wrapped around him, bruises that were healing but still visible. The witch whistled low. "Vale really wanted you dead. Here." She soaked a cloth in the glowing mixture and began cleaning the wounds. Dominic hissed, his hands clenching, but he held still. Elena found herself moving closer, wanting to offer comfort, but not sure how. Rowena noticed and smiled. "You can hold his hand if you like. This hurts considerably." Elena took Dominic's hand, and his fingers immediately wrapped around hers, gripping tight. She felt the tension in his body, saw the way his jaw clenched against the pain. Whatever was in that mixture, it was clearly working. The wounds began to close faster. the angry red fading to pink and then to the unnatural pallor of his usual skin. "There," Rowena said after several long minutes, "that should do it. You'll be back to full strength by dawn." She set the bowl aside and fixed them both with her too bright gaze. "Now, tell me everything, and don't leave out any details. I want to know exactly what kind of trouble has landed on my doorstep." They told her everything. Dominic explained how they met, his decision to reveal his nature, eventually, and the impossible pregnancy. Elena filled in her research, her theories about blood right and hybrid claims. Together, they described the hunters, the escape, the standing stones, and Vale's promise to drag them back to the Covenant. Through it all, Rowena listened with complete attention, occasionally asking pointed questions. When they finished, she sat back, her expression thoughtful. "This is worse than I thought," she said finally, "and more interesting." "Worse how?" Elena asked. "Because you're not just dealing with the Covenant's bureaucracy. You've accidentally created a political crisis." Rowena stood and began pacing, her bare feet silent on the stone floor.
The Ashford bloodline is one of the oldest vampire dynasties in Europe. Dominic, your family helped negotiate the original treaties, didn't they? My grandfather did, yes. House Ashford was one of the founding members of the Knight Parliament. Exactly, which means any legitimate heir to your bloodline would have considerable political power, if the vampire courts recognize them. She turned to Elena. "And you, my dear, are human, which means your child would theoretically be protected under human law as well. A being that exists in both worlds, with claims to power in both. Do you see the problem?" Elena's mind raced through the implications. The Covenant exists to keep the world separate, to maintain boundaries. A hybrid that can move freely between both worlds undermines their entire purpose, Rowena finished. They can't allow it, not just because of purity concerns, but because it threatens the very foundation of the treaty system. If one hybrid can exist, others can too. And if beings can bridge both worlds, she spread her hands, what use is the Covenant? Dominic swore softly. They'll never let us negotiate. The child's very existence is an existential threat to them. Not quite, Rowena said. There is a precedent, actually. It's obscure, buried in the archives, probably deliberately forgotten, but it exists. In 1547, a witch and a fey noble produced a hybrid child. The Covenant of that era almost went to war over it, but eventually a compromise was reached. What kind of compromise? Elena asked. The child was allowed to live, but only under strict conditions. It had to prove itself worthy, demonstrate that its existence enhanced the balance rather than destroyed it. The Covenant set 3 trials. If the child passed all 3, it would be granted full recognition in both worlds. If it failed, she made a slicing gesture. Execution. What happened? The child passed. Became quite famous, actually, though the records were later suppressed. The point is, there's legal precedent for your situation. The Covenant can be forced to offer the same terms, if you can make them. Dominic shook his head. Vale didn't come to negotiate. She came to kill. Vale follows orders, but she's not the one giving them. Rowena moved to one of her shelves, pulling down a massive book bound in what looked like human skin. Elena tried not to think about that too hard. The Covenant has a ruling council, 12 members, representing the major supernatural factions and the human world. They're the ones who authorize executions, but they're also bound by their own laws and precedents. So we force a legal challenge, Elena said slowly. Make them acknowledge the precedent. Make them offer the trials. Easier said than done. You'd need to present your case before the full council, which means getting to their headquarters without being killed by hunters along the way. You'd need legal representation, someone who knows Covenant law intimately. And you'd need leverage, something that makes them willing to listen rather than simply executing you on sight.
The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, where her impossible child grew. 7 weeks now, or maybe 8, so small, but already the center of a crisis that spanned 2 worlds. "I'll do it," she said quietly, "whatever it takes. The trials, the legal challenge, all of it." "Elena," Dominic started, but she cut him off. "No, this is my choice, my child. I won't let them kill it because it scares them. If there's even a chance of making this work, I have to try." Rowena studied her with those unsettling eyes. "You understand what you're proposing? The trials aren't tests of intelligence or strength. They're designed to break you, to prove that a hybrid has the resilience to exist in both worlds without destroying the balance. The historical accounts are not encouraging. But the child in 1547... The child in 1547 was the offspring of 2 supernatural beings, both of whom were centuries old and extremely powerful. You're human, Dominic is relatively young by vampire standards, and your child will be born into a world that's actively hostile to its existence. The witch's voice wasn't unkind, just brutally honest. The odds are not in your favor. They never have been, Elia said. I'm a nobody from nowhere who somehow caught the attention of a vampire lord and conceived the impossible. Odds have been irrelevant since the beginning. Dominic smiled. She's not wrong. Rowena laughed, that wind chime laugh again. Oh, I do like you both. Very well, I'll help you, but on certain conditions. Which are? Dominic asked warily. First, you stay here for 3 days. Elena needs rest, proper food, and prenatal care. Yes, I know some midwifery. Stop looking so shocked. Dominic, you need to heal completely and regain your full strength. And I need time to research the legal precedents thoroughly and prepare your case. The Covenant will be searching for us, Dominic pointed out. Let them search. This place is warded 6 ways from Sunday. Vale herself couldn't find you here unless I wanted her to. Rowena held up a second finger. Second condition. When this is over, if you survive, you owe me a favor. To be called in at a time and place of my choosing. What kind of favor? Elena asked suspiciously. If I knew that now, it wouldn't be a very interesting favor, would it? But I promise it won't involve harming innocents or betraying your principles. I'm not interested in that kind of drama. Dominic and Elena looked at each other. It was a dangerous bargain. Open-ended favors to powerful witches rarely went well in the stories, but they didn't have many options. Agreed, Dominic said. Excellent! Rowena clapped her hands together. Third condition. You let me study the child. Not invasively, just magical observation. A hybrid of vampire has never been documented properly. The magical signature alone would be fascinating research. After the child is born, Elena said firmly, and only if it doesn't cause harm. Fair enough. Now, let's get you both settled. Elena, you look like you're about to fall over. There's a bedroom through that archway. The bed is more comfortable than it looks. Dominic, you can have the second room, unless, she raised an eyebrow, unless you'd prefer to share. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She and Dominic hadn't discussed sleeping arrangements, hadn't discussed much of anything personal since he'd appeared on her doorstep covered in blood. Separate rooms, Dominic said, though his eyes lingered on Elena. For now. Your loss. The wards are strongest in the main bedroom, but suit yourself. Rowena waved them toward the archways. Sleep. Tomorrow we begin your education in Covenant law. It's terribly dull, I warn you, but absolutely necessary if you want to survive your appeal. Elena found the bedroom exactly as promised, a space that seemed to exist partially in the stone of the mountain itself, with a bed that was indeed more comfortable than its appearance suggested. She collapsed onto it fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, pulled down into dreams of standing stones and ancient magic and a child with silver eyes. She woke to sunlight streaming through a window that definitely hadn't been there the night before. Rowena's home seemed to reconfigure itself based on need or whim, and the smell of cooking food. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and her mouth tasted like she'd been licking dirt. But she was alive. Her child was alive, and they had, for the moment, a chance. Elena found the main room transformed by daylight.
What had seemed mysterious and slightly sinister in the firelight now looked almost cozy. A kitchen area had appeared, complete with a stove where Rowena was cooking something that smelled incredible. Dominic was nowhere to be seen. "He's in the lower chamber," Rowena said without turning around, avoiding the sunlight. "It won't kill him, not a vampire of his age and bloodline, but it's uncomfortable, weakening. He'll emerge at dusk." "So, we're really staying here for 3 days?" "You need it. Sit, eat." Rowena placed a plate in front of Elena. "Eggs, toast, something that might have been bacon. I've already begun the research. The legal precedent is solid, but getting the Covenant to acknowledge it will require careful maneuvering." Elena ate ravenously, surprised by her hunger. Between bites, she asked, "What kind of maneuvering?" "The kind that requires you to understand exactly how the Covenant operates. They're not a monolithic organization, they're a coalition of interests, often competing ones. The vampire representatives have different priorities than the human ones, who disagree with the Fae representatives, and so on." Rowena poured tea that smelled of mint and something sweeter. "To win your appeal, you need to split that coalition. Make different factions see benefit in supporting you. How? That's what we're going to figure out over the next 3 days. Now, finish eating. You're feeding too, after all, and the child will need all the strength it can get." The next 3 days passed in a strange blur of intensive education and careful preparation. Rowena proved to be a demanding teacher, drilling Elena in Covenant law with the precision of a university professor, which, she mentioned casually, she had been once in Vienna in the 1700s. Elena learned about the 3 trials a hybrid must pass. The first was the trial of blood, a test of physical resilience and the ability to control both human and supernatural aspects of one's nature.
The second was the trial of will, resisting magical compulsion and proving mental fortitude. The third was the trial of balance, demonstrating that the hybrid's existence would enhance rather than destroy the supernatural human equilibrium. "The first trial is usually the easiest," Rowena explained, as they sat surrounded by ancient texts. "It's straightforward. Survive a situation that would kill a normal human, but requires more than just supernatural strength. The child in 1547 fought a demon while bound in iron. She won by using both her Fae magic and her witch heritage in combination. And the second trial? Trickier. The Covenant will try to break the hybrid's mind, force them to choose one nature over the other. The goal is to prove you can hold both identities simultaneously without fragmenting." Rowena's expression was grave. Several hybrid candidates have gone mad during this trial. The cognitive dissonance of being 2 things at once can shatter an unprepared mind. And the third? The most subjective and therefore the most dangerous. You must convince the Covenant that your existence makes both worlds better, not worse. How you do that depends entirely on the specific situation and the composition of the council at the time. Elena absorbed all of this, taking notes in a journal Rowena provided. At night, when Dominic emerged from the lower chambers, they planned together. He provided information about the current Covenant Council members, their personalities, their prejudices, their political positions. Lord Erebus represents the vampire faction, he explained. Ancient, powerful, and deeply conservative. He'll be your biggest opponent. He sees any deviation from tradition as a threat. Who might support us? Elena asked. Possibly Counselor Winters, the human representative. She's pragmatic, interested in advancing human interests within the supernatural world. If we can convince her that a hybrid could be an asset to humanity, he shrugged.
It's a slim chance, but a chance. They worked through every angle, every possible argument. Rowena coached Elena in how to speak before the council, how to frame her case in terms they couldn't easily dismiss. You're the key to this, the witch told her, not Dominic. You, a human woman fighting for her child. That's a narrative that transcends politics. But you have to be perfect. One emotional outburst, one moment of weakness, and they'll dismiss you as an irrational human who can't be trusted with supernatural matters. No pressure, Elena said dryly. On the third day, as they were finalizing their strategy, Rowena suddenly went rigid, her eyes unfocused, and Elena recognized the signs of a witch having a vision or sensing something through her wards. They've found us, Rowena said quietly. The Covenant. Not just Vale and her hunters, the full council. They're approaching through the mountain passes. Dominic was on his feet instantly. How long? An hour, perhaps less. Rowena began moving through her home, gathering items and tucking them into pockets that seemed deeper than they should be. They're not being subtle. This is a show of force. They mean to overwhelm any resistance. Can your wards hold them? Elena asked. Against Vale and a dozen hunters, yes. Against the full might of the Covenant Council, including 3 of the most powerful supernatural beings in Europe? Rowena shook her head. No, I'm good, but I'm not suicidal. So we run again, Dominic said grimly. No, Elena stood, her decision crystallizing. No more running. We go to them. Present our case now, before they can set the terms. Elena, we're not ready. We're as ready as we're going to be. And Rowena's right. They're making a show of force. They want us intimidated, frightened. She looked between the witch and the vampire. So we do the last thing they expect. We surrender voluntarily and demand a formal hearing. Rowena's eyes widened. Then she began to laugh. Oh, you magnificent creature! Yes, yes, that could work. The Covenant is bound by their own laws. If you formally request a hearing and invoke the precedent, they have to grant it. To refuse would be to admit their laws mean nothing. Unless they simply kill us before we can request it, Dominic pointed out. They won't. Elena was surprised by her own certainty. Not with the full council present. That many political interests, that many competing agendas. They'll want to hear what we have to say, if only to find the best way to discredit us. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're probably right, and it does give us the element of surprise. He turned to Rowena. Will you stand as our advocate, speak on our behalf? Me? Oh no, I'm many things, but I'm not a lawyer. Rowena grinned. However, I know someone who is. Someone who knows Covenant law better than almost anyone alive, and who has a personal grudge against Lord Erebus. She pulled out a small mirror from her pocket and whispered something to it. The surface rippled like water. A face appeared in the mirror, an older man with steel gray hair and sharp features. Rowena, it's been too long. To what do I owe the... He stopped, his eyes narrowing. Is that Dominic Ashford behind you? And the human woman? Marcus, darling, how would you like to embarrass the Covenant Council and make Lord Erebus look like a fool in the process? The man's expression shifted to something predatory.
I'm listening. 30 minutes later, they had a plan. Marcus Castellan, former Covenant prosecutor turned private advocate, would meet them at the mountain pass and present their case. He'd already begun drafting the formal request for a hearing, invoking the 1547 precedent. He's good, Rowena assured them as they prepared to leave her home. Brilliant, actually. And he hates the vampire old guard with a passion. Something about his daughter being denied entry to the night parliament. They emerged from Rowena's home into the cold mountain air. The sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Elena took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Whatever happens," Dominic said quietly, taking her hand, "I want you to know, meeting you was the best thing that happened to me in 300 years. Even if this ends badly, even if they—" "Don't," Elena interrupted. "We're going to survive this, all three of us." She placed his hand on her belly, where the child grew. "I won't accept any other outcome." His eyes met hers, silver in the dying light. "I love you, Elena Chen. I should have said it before. I was a coward. You were careful. I understand why." She smiled. "But yes, you should have said it. For the record, I love you too. Even though you're a vampire lord who got me into the worst situation of my life." "When you phrase it like that," she kissed him, cutting off his words. It was brief, fierce, and filled with everything they didn't have time to say. When they broke apart, Rowena was watching with an amused expression. "Adorable. Now move. The Covenant waits for no one, not even star-crossed lovers." They descended the mountain as the last light faded from the sky. Elena could see them now, a procession of figures moving up the pass, surrounded by orbs of cold light that floated in the air. Even from a distance, she could sense the power radiating from them. These were not mere hunters. These were beings who had shaped the supernatural world for centuries. At the front walked a woman in formal robes, carrying a staff that crackled with barely contained energy. Next to her, a man who moved with Dominic's same predatory grace, but somehow more pronounced, more alien. Behind them, others, some human, some clearly not, all radiating authority. "The Council," Dominic murmured, "all 12 of them." "They really did bring everyone." "Good," Elena said, with more confidence than she felt. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." They walked forward to meet the procession. When they were perhaps 20 yards apart, both groups stopped. The woman with the staff stepped forward. Counselor Winters, Elena guessed from Dominic's descriptions. "Dominic Ashford," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Elena Chen, you are both wanted for violating the Treaty of Separate Worlds, Article 7, Subsection 3, the creation of hybrid offspring between human and supernatural bloodlines. Do you deny these charges?" Elena stepped forward before Dominic could answer. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "We acknowledge the situation, Counselor, but we reject the characterization of it as a violation. We come before you today to formally invoke the precedent of mixed blood, established in 1547, and request a hearing before this council." Silence. Several council members exchanged glances. The male vampire, Lord Erebus, certainly looked openly disdainful. But Counselor Winter's expression shifted to something like interest. "The precedent of mixed blood," she repeated. "That's an obscure reference, Miss Chen. Where did you learn of it?" "I'm a research librarian, Counselor. Obscure is my specialty." A faint smile crossed Winter's face. "Indeed. And you understand what invoking this precedent means? The trials, the conditions?" "Completely."